The coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago. Wesley Porter sat frozen in his chair, staring at the empty seat across from him, 2 untouched menus mocking his hope. The waitress passed by for the 4th time, her pitying glance cutting deeper than any words could. 3 years of single fatherhood, dozens of failed dates, and now this abandoned in a crowded cafe on a Friday night, his best shirt suddenly feeling like a costume for a role he could never play. He reached for his phone to call it a night when the door swung open. The woman who walked in made his breath catch, not because she was beautiful, but because he knew exactly who she was. Charlotte Lane, his CEO, the untouchable executive from the top floor. And she was heading straight toward his table, toward the empty chair, with a look in her eyes that suggested her evening had been just as brutal as his. What happened next would send shockwaves through their company, destroy reputations, and force 2 lonely hearts to choose between everything they had built and everything they never knew they needed. Wesley had spent the entire week preparing for this moment. He had asked Mrs. Henderson next door to watch Rosie promising his 6-year-old daughter that Daddy would be home before her bedtime story. He had ironed his navy blue shirt 3 times until the creases were sharp enough to cut glass. He had even practiced conversation starters in the bathroom mirror, feeling ridiculous, but desperate enough to try anything. The dating app had matched him with a woman named Jessica, who loved hiking and had a smile that reminded him of summer. For the first time in 3 years, he had allowed himself to feel something close to hope. The cafe was one of those trendy places downtown, with exposed brick walls and Edison bulbs hanging from the ceiling like frozen fireflies. Wesley had arrived 15 minutes early, because that was the kind of man he was, punctual, prepared, perpetually afraid of disappointing anyone. He had chosen a table by the window, where the soft amber light would be flattering, where they could watch the city lights flicker to life as the evening deepened. The waiter had brought 2 menus, 2 glasses of water, and a knowing smile that made Wesley's heart flutter with anticipation. 7 o'clock came and went. Then 7:15. Wesley checked his phone, obsessively refreshing the screen until his thumb ached. At 7:23, the message arrived with the cold efficiency of a guillotine blade. "Sorry, something came up. Rain check." No explanation, no genuine apology. Just 5 words that erased an entire week of hope and preparation. Wesley read the message 3 times each reading, carving a deeper groove into his already weathered heart. He wanted to be angry, but anger required energy he no longer possessed. The cafe buzzed with the sounds of successful connections. Couples leaned toward each other across candlelit tables, their laughter a symphony of belonging that Wesley could only observe from the outside. A young man 2 tables over was nervously presenting a ring to his girlfriend, her joyful tears reflecting the light like scattered diamonds. Everywhere Wesley looked, he saw proof of something he had begun to believe was not meant for him. Love, partnership, the simple comfort of having someone to share a meal with on a Friday night. He thought about Rosie waiting at home, probably pestering Mrs. Henderson with questions about when Daddy would return. His daughter had been so excited when he told her he was going on a date. "Does this mean I might get a new mommy?" she had asked, with the innocent cruelty that only children could wield. Wesley had fumbled through an explanation about how these things take time, how Daddy just wanted to meet new friends first. But the truth was, he wanted exactly what Rosie wanted. He wanted someone to help him build a life. He wanted someone to share the weight of his loneliness. The waitress approached his table for the 4th time, her expression a mixture of professional courtesy and genuine pity. "Still waiting for someone, sir?" she asked, though they both knew the answer. Wesley managed a smile that felt like wearing a mask made of broken glass. "I think I'll just get the check," he said, his voice steady despite the earthquake happening inside his chest. She nodded with understanding and walked away, leaving Wesley alone with the debris of his shattered expectations. He reached for his phone to text Mrs. Henderson, that he was on his way home early. His finger hovered over the keyboard, searching for words that would not betray how pathetic he felt. And then, the door swung open, bringing with it a gust of autumn wind and the subtle scent of expensive perfume. Wesley looked up instinctively the way one does when movement interrupts stillness. What he saw made his breath catch in his throat, and his carefully constructed composure crumble like a sandcastle against the tide. Charlotte Lane stood in the doorway, her silhouette framed by the city lights behind her. Wesley recognized her immediately, everyone in the company would. She was the CEO of Porter & Associates, the woman whose corner office occupied the entire top floor, whose decisions could make or break careers with a single signature. He had seen her in quarterly meetings, always from a distance, always surrounded by a fortress of executives and assistants. She was untouchable, unreachable, a figure more myth than human to someone like him, a senior accountant on the fourth floor who balanced spreadsheets while she balanced empires. But something was different tonight. The armor she wore so confidently in boardrooms seemed to have slipped. Her shoulders carried a tension that spoke of disappointment, and her eyes, those sharp, intelligent eyes that could dissect a financial report in seconds, held a vulnerability Wesley had never seen before. She scanned the cafe with the quick assessment of someone used to controlling environments, and then her gaze landed on him. On the empty chair across from him, on the two untouched menus that told a story she apparently recognized. Charlotte did not hesitate. She crossed the cafe with the same decisive stride that had carried her through countless negotiations and hostile takeovers. Wesley watched her approach, his mind racing through 100 possible explanations for why his CEO was walking toward his table of failure. Perhaps she needed to discuss a report. Perhaps she had mistaken him for someone else. Perhaps he was hallucinating from the stress of being publicly abandoned. None of these explanations prepared him for what she did next. "Is this seat taken?" Charlotte asked, gesturing to the empty chair with a wry smile that contained more self-deprecation than Wesley had ever thought possible from someone of her stature. Her voice was different outside the echo chamber of conference rooms, warmer, softer, threaded with something that sounded almost like exhaustion. Wesley opened his mouth to respond, but his tongue had apparently decided to take the evening off. He gestured weakly at the chair, an invitation born from shock rather than coherent thought. Charlotte sat down across from him, placing her designer handbag on the floor with the casual disregard of someone who had bigger concerns than material possessions. "I'm going to be honest with you," she said, picking up one of the abandoned menus and studying it with exaggerated interest. "I was supposed to meet someone here tonight. A blind date arranged by my well-meaning but extremely misguided sister. He took one look at me from outside the window, apparently decided I was not worth his time, and drove away. I watched his taillights disappear while standing on the sidewalk like an idiot." Wesley felt his jaw slacken with disbelief. Charlotte Lane. The Charlotte Lane had been stood up on a date. The woman who commanded respect in every room she entered, whose net worth was probably larger than Wesley's lifetime earnings, had been deemed not worth someone's time. The universe suddenly seemed less cruel and more absurdly random. "I got a text message," Wesley heard himself say, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice. 5 words. "Sorry, something came up." Not even a period at the end. Charlotte looked up from the menu, and for a moment something passed between them. Recognition, understanding, the shared humiliation of being found wanting by someone who had never bothered to know them. "Well," she said, setting down the menu with a decisive gesture, "it seems we have 2 options. We can both go home to our respective empty apartments and feel sorry for ourselves. Or we can salvage this disaster of an evening by actually eating the dinner we both got dressed up for. I vote for option 2. The waiter appeared as if summoned by Charlotte's executive presence, his demeanor shifting from sympathetic to attentive in the span of a heartbeat. Charlotte ordered a bottle of wine and 2 specials without consulting Wesley, then caught herself mid-sentence. "I apologize," she said, looking at him with genuine contrition. "Force of habit. I spend all day making decisions for other people." "What would you like?" Wesley found himself smiling for the first time all evening. "The special sounds perfect," he said. "And I could definitely use that wine." The first glass went down quickly, loosening the knots of tension that had been building in Wesley's shoulders all week. Charlotte asked him about his work, and he found himself explaining the intricacies of quarterly audits with an enthusiasm he usually reserved for conversations with Rosie about cartoon characters. She listened with genuine interest, asking questions that revealed a depth of knowledge about every level of her company that surprised him. This was not the distant, untouchable executive he had imagined. This was a woman who remembered the names of janitors and knew which floors had the worst coffee machines. As the evening deepened, the conversation shifted from professional to personal. Wesley learned that Charlotte had built her career from nothing, working her way up from an entry-level position while raising a daughter alone. "Her name is Harper, Charlotte," said, her voice softening in a way that transformed her entire face. "She is 7 years old, obsessed with dinosaurs, and convinced that she is going to be the first paleontologist to discover a new species. She is the best thing I have ever done, and also the reason I have not been on a proper date in years." Wesley felt something shift in his chest, a tectonic plate of emotion moving into new territory. "I have a daughter too," he said, the words tumbling out with an eagerness that surprised him. "Rosie. She is 6. Her current ambitions include becoming a veterinarian, a princess, and a professional ice cream taster, preferably all at once." Charlotte laughed, a genuine sound that had nothing to do with boardroom politics or corporate image. "They sound like they would get along," she said. "Harper needs more friends her age. I am afraid my work schedule has not exactly facilitated a robust social calendar for her." They talked until the cafe began closing around them, chairs being stacked on tables like polite suggestions to leave. Wesley discovered that Charlotte's favorite movie was a childhood classic he had watched with Rosie just last weekend. Charlotte learned that Wesley had once dreamed of being a writer before practicality and fatherhood had redirected his path. They compared notes on the challenges of single parenting, the guilt of missed school plays, the exhaustion of being everything to someone who depended on you completely, the quiet terror of wondering if you were doing any of it right. When the waiter finally brought the check, Charlotte reached for it, with the automatic gesture of someone who always paid. Wesley placed his hand over hers, surprising them both. "Let me," he said. "You may be my boss, but you are also the person who turned the worst Friday night of my year into something I will actually remember fondly." Charlotte studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she withdrew her hand and smiled. "Fine. But next time it is on me." The words, "next time," hung in the air between them, a promise neither had intended to make, but both found themselves hoping to keep. The following Monday, Wesley arrived at work with the strange sensation of walking through a dream. The weekend had passed in a blur of replayed conversations and cautious optimism. He had told Rosie about meeting a nice lady, carefully omitting the detail that the nice lady happened to control his professional destiny. Rosie had demanded to know if the lady liked dinosaurs, and Wesley had made a mental note to ask Charlotte that exact question. If there was a next time, if the magic of Friday night could survive the fluorescent reality of Monday morning, he found out sooner than expected. Shortly after lunch, Wesley's desk phone rang with an internal extension he did not recognize. The voice on the other end was Charlotte's assistant, informing him that Ms. Lane required his presence at a 3 o'clock meeting to discuss budgetary concerns regarding the fourth quarter projections. Wesley agreed with professional calm, while his heart performed acrobatics against his ribcage. When he arrived at the executive conference room, he found Charlotte alone standing by the window, with a view that made his cubicle seem like a storage closet. "There are no budgetary concerns," Charlotte said without turning around. "I just wanted to see you without the entire company watching." She finally faced him, and Wesley was struck again by how different she looked outside the context of formal meetings. Softer, more human, more like the woman who had laughed at his terrible jokes over mediocre pasta. "I have not stopped thinking about Friday night," she continued, "and I don't know what to do about it. This is extremely inconvenient for someone who is supposed to have all the answers." Wesley wanted to cross the room and kiss her. He wanted to run away and protect his carefully constructed life from the chaos that was surely coming. Instead, he did what he always did. When overwhelmed, he made a joke. "If it helps," he said, "I have spent the entire weekend mentally rehearsing conversations we might have. I have prepared responses for at least 47 different scenarios. Unfortunately, CEO admits to having feelings was not among them." Charlotte laughed that same genuine sound from the cafe. "You know this is complicated," she said. "You know what people will say." Wesley nodded slowly. "I know. But I am also tired of letting fear make my decisions." What followed was a delicate dance of clandestine meetings and carefully constructed excuses. Charlotte found reasons to visit the fourth floor with suspicious frequency. Wesley found himself included in meetings far above his pay grade, where he contributed nothing but found every excuse to catch Charlotte's eye across the conference table. They were careful. They were discreet. They were fooling absolutely no one, though they did not realize it yet. The office rumor mill began grinding with new intensity. Brenda from accounting was the first to put the pieces together. She had always been the type to notice things, who took long lunches, who received unexpected promotions, whose name appeared too frequently on the CEO's calendar. She mentioned her observations to Rick Wesley's direct supervisor, who had never particularly liked Wesley's quiet competence and perfect reports. Together, they began constructing a narrative that painted Wesley as an opportunist, a climber using charm instead of merit to ascend the corporate ladder. The whispers followed Wesley through hallways like shadows with voices. "Did you hear about Porter? Apparently, he is sleeping his way to the top. Must be nice to have the boss wrapped around your finger. I wonder what his daughter thinks about Daddy's new strategy." Wesley heard every word, felt every sidelong glance, absorbed every snicker that stopped abruptly when he entered rooms. The worst part was not the cruelty. It was the kernel of doubt it planted in his own mind. Was he being naive? Was Charlotte simply amusing herself with a convenient distraction? Did he deserve any of this? Charlotte remained oblivious to the growing storm, insulated by the bubble of executive privilege that filtered most gossip before it reached her ears. She texted Wesley pictures of Harper's latest dinosaur drawings and asked about Rosie's week at school. She made plans for the four of them to meet at the park that Saturday, a prospect that thrilled Wesley even as it terrified him. The thought of their daughters meeting felt like crossing a threshold that could not be uncrossed. It felt like admitting this was real. Saturday arrived wrapped in perfect autumn weather, the kind of day that seemed designed for new beginnings. Wesley brought Rosie to the park early, his daughter vibrating with excitement at the prospect of meeting a new friend. Charlotte and Harper were already there, sitting on a bench near the playground. Harper was explaining something about velociraptors with intense seriousness, while Charlotte nodded along with the patient attention of a mother who had heard this lecture many times before. When Rosie spotted them, she took off running before Wesley could introduce anyone properly. The girls collided in the middle of the playground with the instant friendship that only children can forge. Within minutes, they were climbing structures together, sharing secrets, and making plans that involved invisible dinosaurs and a princess castle that could only be reached by crossing a lava moat. Wesley and Charlotte watched from the bench, their shoulders almost touching their hearts, synchronized in something that felt dangerously like hope. "They are perfect together," Charlotte said softly. "Like they have known each other forever." Wesley nodded, not trusting his voice. He was watching Rosie laugh in a way she had not laughed since her mother left. The afternoon stretched into evening, punctuated by ice cream stops and spontaneous detours to look at interesting bugs. Harper taught Rosie the proper pronunciation of Pachycephalosaurus. Rosie taught Harper her secret method for getting extra sprinkles. By the time the sun began setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the four of them had formed something that looked remarkably like a family. Wesley drove home with Rosie asleep in the back seat, her hand still clutching a friendship bracelet Harper had made from playground weeds. The next week at work brought escalating hostility. Rick began finding fault with reports that had previously earned praise. Brenda made pointed comments about certain people who thought they were too good for normal channels of advancement. An anonymous note appeared in Wesley's mailbox, suggesting he watch his back. Wesley absorbed it all with the stoic endurance of someone who had survived worse, but the cumulative weight began to show. He grew quieter, his smiles became rarer. The joy he had discovered with Charlotte started to feel like a burden rather than a gift. More meetings followed, more park visits, more moments where Wesley allowed himself to imagine a future that included Charlotte and Harper permanently. Rosie began asking about them constantly. "When can I see Harper again? Can Charlotte come to my school? Play? Does Charlotte know how to braid hair like Mommy used to?" Each question was a needle threading Wesley deeper into a tapestry he was not sure he had the right to weave. He loved Charlotte. He was certain of that now. But love had never been enough to protect him from loss before. The photograph appeared on a Monday morning, printed and taped to the break room bulletin board, where everyone would see it. Wesley and Charlotte at the park, sitting close on that bench, their body language telling a story that required no caption. The girls were visible in the background, playing together, providing context that transformed a potentially innocent image into damning evidence. Someone had drawn a heart around the figures with red marker. Someone else had added the words, "office romance," with a question mark that was not really a question. Wesley found out about the photograph when he walked into the break room for his morning coffee and found a dozen colleagues staring at him with expressions ranging from curiosity to contempt. The silence that fell was louder than any accusation. He forced himself to look at the bulletin board to see the evidence of his happiness displayed like a crime scene exhibit. His hand trembled slightly as he poured coffee he no longer wanted. Then he walked back to his desk without meeting anyone's eyes, feeling the weight of their judgment pressing down on his shoulders like a physical force. The email from Human Resources arrived 2 hours later, requesting his presence for a confidential discussion regarding workplace conduct. Wesley read the message 3 times, each reading draining more color from his face. He thought about Rosie, about the stability he had worked so hard to provide, about how quickly everything could collapse. He thought about Charlotte and wondered if she had received a similar summons, if she was sitting in her executive office, watching her empire crack along fault lines she had created for him. For them. The HR meeting was exactly as humiliating as Wesley had anticipated. 2 representatives sat across from him, their faces carefully neutral, their questions designed to extract admissions without making direct accusations. They asked about his relationship with Ms. Lane. They asked about the meetings he had attended outside his normal responsibilities. They asked about the photograph and whether it represented a pattern of behavior that might constitute a conflict of interest. Wesley answered honestly because lying had never been a skill he possessed, and because he was tired of pretending that loving someone was something to be ashamed of. He returned to his desk, to find another anonymous note, this one more direct than the first. "Resign before you get fired. Save yourself the embarrassment." Wesley read the words and felt something break inside him, not his spirit, but his patience. He was done being the target of people who had never bothered to know him. He was done letting strangers define the boundaries of his happiness. He opened his email and began composing a message to Charlotte, his fingers finding the words he had been too afraid to speak. "We need to stop. This is destroying both of us. I cannot watch you sacrifice everything you have built because of me. Please understand." He sent the message before he could lose his nerve, then sat in his chair, waiting for a response that did not come. Minutes stretched into an hour. The hour crawled toward lunch. Wesley checked his email, obsessively refreshed his phone until the battery began dying, and tried to convince himself that this was the right decision. Protecting Charlotte meant protecting Rosie, and protecting Rosie was the only thing that had ever truly mattered. He would survive this heartbreak like he had survived all the others. He would rebuild. He always did. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime that Wesley did not register until he heard the sudden silence sweeping across the 4th floor like a wave. He looked up from his desk and saw Charlotte walking toward him, her heels clicking against the linoleum with a rhythm that suggested purpose rather than casual visit. Every head in the office turned to watch. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Charlotte Lane was on the 4th floor, and she was heading directly for Wesley Porter's cubicle with an expression that could have melted steel. She stopped in front of his desk, close enough that he could smell her perfume over the industrial scent of office air fresheners. "You sent me an email," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the absolute silence. "You told me we need to stop. You told me you were doing this to protect me." She paused, and Wesley saw something in her eyes that looked like barely contained fury. "Let me be very clear about something. I did not build a company from nothing by letting other people make decisions about my life. I did not raise a daughter alone by running away from difficult situations. And I will not let you sacrifice our happiness because a few small-minded people cannot handle seeing something beautiful." Wesley stood up from his chair, suddenly aware that this conversation was happening in front of everyone. Every colleague who had whispered about him, every person who had doubted his intentions, every skeptic who believed that someone like him could never deserve someone like her. "Charlotte," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "they are going to destroy your reputation. Everything you have worked for is meaningless without someone to share it with." Charlotte interrupted. "I have spent 7 years climbing a ladder that leads to an empty office and an empty home. I have achieved everything I was supposed to want, and none of it makes me happy. Then I walked into a cafe on the worst night of my life and found a man who looks at his daughter the way you look at Rosie. A man who makes me laugh. A man who makes Harper ask every single day when she can see her new friend again." Her voice cracked slightly on the last sentence, revealing the vulnerability beneath her executive armor. The silence in the office had transformed from hostile to something else entirely. Wesley could feel the atmosphere shifting, the narrative rewriting itself in real time as colleagues witnessed something they had not expected. This was not a scandal. This was not an exploitation. This was 2 people standing in front of each other, stripped of pretense, admitting to feelings that transcended corporate hierarchies and office politics. "Charlotte," Wesley said, again softer this time. "Are you sure?" She reached out and took his hand, interlacing their fingers, in full view of everyone watching. "I have never been more sure of anything," she said. "The question is whether you are brave enough to stop running, whether you can look me in the eye and tell me you do not feel what I feel." Wesley looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman who had transformed his worst Friday night into the beginning of something extraordinary. He saw Harper's mother. He saw Rosie's potential future. He saw his own terrified reflection in her eyes, and he saw hope staring back. "I feel it." He said the words barely above a whisper. "I feel everything." The aftermath of Charlotte's public declaration rippled through the company like waves from a stone dropped into still water. Human Resources quietly closed their investigation after a brief meeting where Charlotte made clear that her personal relationships were not subject to corporate oversight. Rick's complaints about Wesley's work suddenly seemed less urgent when reviewed by executives who had witnessed their CEO's passionate defense. Brenda found other targets for her attention, her gossip losing potency, now that the secret was no longer secret. Wesley and Charlotte sat in her office the evening after her confrontation on the 4th floor, the city lights twinkling beyond the windows like scattered stars. The adrenaline had faded, leaving behind the quieter work of figuring out what came next. "I should have told you sooner," Charlotte said, her fingers wrapped around a cup of coffee that had gone cold without her noticing. "About my past, about why I understand what you are going through better than you might think." She told him about the early years when Harper was just a baby, and Charlotte was a junior analyst working 60-hour weeks while her marriage collapsed around her. Her husband had left when Harper was barely walking, deciding that fatherhood required more sacrifice than he was willing to make. Charlotte had spent years rebuilding her career, her confidence, her belief that she could be enough for her daughter without anyone else's help. "I brought Harper to the office when I could not afford childcare," she said, her voice carrying the weight of old wounds that had never fully healed. "I nursed her during conference calls. I changed diapers in bathroom stalls during board meetings. And the whole time I was terrified that people would see me as less capable because I was a mother." Wesley listened without interrupting, recognizing the shape of her story because it mirrored his own. Different details, same fundamental struggle. The loneliness of being everything to a child who needed more than one person could provide. The exhaustion that became so constant, it felt like personality. The desperate hope that someday, somehow, things would get easier. "I stayed away from relationships because I was afraid," Charlotte continued. "Afraid of letting someone close enough to leave again. Afraid of Harper getting attached and then losing someone else. But then I met you, and Harper met Rosie, and something changed." She looked at him with an expression that contained no trace of the corporate mask she wore in boardrooms. "My daughter asks about Rosie every single day. She draws pictures of the four of us together. You, me, her, Rosie, like we are already a family. She has never done that before. Not with anyone." Charlotte paused, collecting herself. "I am not telling you this to pressure you. I am telling you because you need to understand that this is not casual for me. This is not a convenient distraction. This is me, terrified and hopeful and completely out of my depth, asking if you feel the same way." Wesley reached across the space between them and took her hand, the same gesture she had made in front of the entire 4th floor. "I love you," he said, the words emerging with a certainty that surprised him. "I have been trying not to say it, because it seemed too fast, too impossible, too much, like the kind of thing that only happens in stories. But it is true. I love you. I love how you laugh at jokes that are not even funny. I love how you talk about Harper like she is the most important person in the universe. I love that you walked into the worst night of my life and turned it into the best thing that has ever happened to me." They sat together as the city darkened outside the windows, making plans that felt both thrilling and terrifying. Charlotte would formally disclose their relationship to the board of directors, not because she needed their permission, but because transparency was better than speculation. Wesley would begin looking for positions at other companies, not because anyone was forcing him, but because building his own success independently felt important. They would introduce their families properly, creating space for Harper and Rosie to develop the sisterhood they had already begun forging in parks and playgrounds. That night, Wesley called Rosie before her bedtime and listened to his daughter's voice through the phone speaker. "Daddy, Mrs. Henderson let me have extra cookies because I told her you are happy now. Are you happy, Daddy?" Wesley felt tears prick at his eyes, the kind that came from joy rather than sorrow. "Yes, sweetheart," he said. "Daddy is very happy." Rosie was quiet for a moment, processing this information with the seriousness only children could bring to emotional conversations. "Good," she finally said. "Because I like Charlotte. And I like Harper. Can Harper be my sister?" Wesley promised to explain everything soon in terms a 6-year-old could understand. He promised that no matter what happened, Rosie would always come first. He promised that the changes coming to their lives would only add to their family, never subtract from it. And as he hung up the phone, he realized that for the first time in 3 years, his promises felt like certainties rather than hopes. 1 year later, Wesley stood in the garden of Charlotte's house, their house now watching autumn leaves drift down from the old oak tree that dominated the backyard. He was wearing a suit that fit better than anything he had ever owned purchased for this specific day, this specific moment. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie for the 15th time, a nervous habit that Charlotte found endearing and that Rosie found hilarious. The chairs arranged on the lawn were filling with guests, colleagues who had become friends, neighbors who had become family, and Mrs. Henderson, who had insisted on a front-row seat. The past year had been a journey of reconstruction and discovery. Wesley had found a position at a competing firm, his reputation and skills speaking louder than any rumors that had followed him. Within 6 months, he had been promoted twice, his talent finally recognized in an environment unclouded by complicated office politics. Charlotte had continued building her company, her leadership somehow strengthened rather than diminished by the public revelation of her humanity. The board had initially expressed concerns, but those concerns evaporated when quarterly profits hit record highs under her continued guidance. More importantly, their families had merged with a grace that still amazed Wesley when he stopped to consider it. Harper and Rosie had become inseparable, their friendship evolving into the sisterhood both girls had always craved. They shared a bedroom, now decorated with dinosaur posters and princess tiaras, in equal measure, a compromise that perfectly captured their complementary personalities. Charlotte had learned to braid hair the way Rosie liked it. Wesley had memorized the names of more dinosaurs than he had ever known existed. They had become, against all odds and expectations, exactly what they had both spent years believing was impossible a family. The music began a gentle melody, played by a string quartet that Charlotte had insisted upon, and Wesley had pretended to resist. The guests turned in their seats, and Wesley felt his breath catch the same way it had caught that night in the café when Charlotte first walked through the door. She was standing at the entrance to the garden, radiant in a simple white dress that somehow managed to be both elegant and unpretentious. But Wesley was not looking at her, not yet. He was looking at the 2 small figures walking ahead of her, their hands clasped together, their matching flower girl dresses swaying with each synchronized step. Harper and Rosie walked down the aisle scattering rose petals, with the concentrated seriousness of children, given an important task. Rosie caught Wesley's eye and grinned, revealing the gap where her front tooth had recently departed. Harper waved at her mother, then remembered she was supposed to be solemn, and quickly resumed her careful march. The guests laughed softly, the kind of laughter that comes from witnessing something pure and unscripted. Wesley felt tears threatening and did not bother to fight them. Then Charlotte was beside him, her hand finding his with the practiced ease of 2 people who had learned to reach for each other in crowds and quiet moments alike. The officiant spoke words about love and commitment, about choosing each other, not just once, but every day, about building something together that neither could build alone. Wesley heard the words through a filter of overwhelming emotion, his attention divided between the woman becoming his wife and the two girls standing just behind them, watching with eyes full of understanding beyond their years. The rings were exchanged simple bands that carried the weight of promises made and kept. Charlotte's voice was steady as she spoke her vows, the same voice that commanded boardrooms now softened into something meant only for him. Wesley's voice cracked twice during his own vows, but no one seemed to mind. When the officiant pronounced them married, the cheer that erupted from the small gathering was genuine and unrestrained. Mrs. Henderson was crying. Several colleagues were discreetly wiping their eyes. And Harper was tugging on Rosie's hand, leaning close to whisper something that made both girls burst into giggles. The reception that followed was exactly what Wesley and Charlotte had wanted, intimate, warm, and focused on the blended family they had created rather than corporate impressions or social obligations. Rosie demanded to make a toast and delivered a speech about how her daddy smiled more now and how Harper was the best sister in the whole world. Harper added her own addendum about dinosaurs being invited to all future family events. The adults laughed and cried and raised their glasses to the unexpected path that had brought them all together. As evening settled over the celebration, Wesley found himself standing at the edge of the garden, watching Charlotte dance with both girls at once. Harper was standing on Charlotte's feet, the way children do when they want to feel grown up. Rosie was spinning in circles nearby, creating her own choreography that defied any known form of dance. Charlotte caught Wesley watching and smiled, not the polished smile of a CEO managing her image, but the unguarded smile of a woman who had finally found what she had been searching for. Wesley thought about that Friday night 1 year ago about cold coffee and pitying waitresses and the certainty that love was something that happened to other people. He thought about the door swinging open and the woman walking in, about empty chairs that became occupied and abandoned evenings that became beginnings. He thought about all the ways life could have gone differently if Jessica had shown up, if Charlotte had chosen another cafe, if either of them had been too afraid to take a chance on something that made no logical sense. Rosie broke away from her spinning and ran toward him, crashing into his legs with the full-body affection that was her specialty. "Daddy," she said, looking up at him, with eyes that held no trace of the sadness he used to see there. "Can I call Charlotte Mommy?" Now Harper says it is okay. Harper says we are sisters for real, so Charlotte is my mommy too. Wesley knelt down to his daughter's level, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "What do you want to call her?" he asked. Rosie thought about it with the gravity of a 6-year-old, considering life's great questions. "Mommy Charlotte," she decided, so she knows she is special. Mommy, not regular mommy. Charlotte appeared beside them, Harper in tow, having overheard the conversation. She knelt down, too, putting herself at eye level with both girls. "I would be honored to be Mommy Charlotte," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "And you know what that makes, Harper." Rosie nodded vigorously. "My sister forever." Harper grinned. "Sisters forever," she confirmed. "Even when you are annoying." Rosie stuck out her tongue in response, and both girls dissolved into laughter. Wesley stood and pulled Charlotte close, their daughters weaving between their legs like joyful obstacles. The party continued around them, music, playing guests, mingling the string quartet, transitioning to something more upbeat. But for a moment, they existed in their own small world. A family forged from loneliness and chance encounters. A love story that began with abandonment and ended with belonging. Two people who had walked into a cafe on the worst night of their lives and walked out with the beginning of everything they had ever wanted. Sometimes Wesley had learned the best things arrive disguised as disasters. Sometimes the empty chair across the table is not a sign of rejection, but a space waiting to be filled by the right person. And sometimes, if you are brave enough to stay seated when everything inside you wants to run, life will send someone through the door who changes everything. Charlotte had been that someone for him. And as they stood together, watching their daughters chase fireflies across the darkening garden, Wesley knew with absolute certainty that the lonely man in the cafe was gone forever, replaced by someone with a family, a future, and a love story worth telling. The coffee had gone cold that night, but everything that came after had been warm